February 2022, the day Europe's deadliest conflict began, with Russian troops entering Ukraine for what Moscow dubbed as a special military operation. But 500 days on, and the battle is still raging. From the Crimean Bridge blast to Nordstrom Pipeline blast to drone attack at Vladimir Putin's residence in Kremlin to Kakhovka Dam explosion in southern Ukraine. To beginning of Kyiv's much-touted counteroffensive to Russia, dodging an attempt at mutiny by Wagner chief. The war has seen it all, but where does the situation stand now? The city of Bakhmut has become the hotbed again, with Ukraine's counteroffensive gaining momentum. It is reminding the world it is no more on a back foot. It claimed its troops had advanced by more than a kilometer near the eastern city of Bakhmut. Ukrainian artillery has been targeting Russian positions on the outskirts of the city. Kyiv says it has taken back some villages in the south since launching its counteroffensive. But Russia still holds large parts of eastern and southeastern Ukraine. Russia continues to unleash its arsenal. There has been no end to its missile and drone attacks. At least 10 were killed and over 45 injured due to Russian airstrikes in Ukraine's western city of Lviv. This is being described as the largest attack on civilian infrastructure since the invasion began. Earlier, Ukraine bombed Russia-occupied Makiivka in Donetsk region. Kyiv claims it destroyed key Russian forces formation in Makiivka. The explosion killed over 1 and injured at least 36. However, Moscow says a hospital complex was attacked. Children were among those injured. The cost of war is going up each day. Now, according to United Nations, over 9,000 civilians have been killed since the war began. 6.3 million Ukrainians have become refugees. But at this point, Russia controls less than 20% of Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine's gains have been modest as well. On the diplomacy front, Ukraine's president has secured Turkey's backing for its NATO bid, vowing to not leave Ukraine defenseless. Washington has pledged cluster munitions to Kyiv. Meanwhile, defiant Russian President Putin is not willing to back down, so the stakes in the war continue to rise. But with no major breakthrough in sight for either side, question remains, how long will this continue? Edward P. Joseph is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University. He is joining us from Washington, D.C. Edward, good to see you and welcome to the program. 500 days of war in Ukraine, but at what cost?
At a tremendous cost, unfortunately. And this cost, of course, is the responsibility of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who made this catastrophic decision against all warnings. Let's not forget the prelude to this war, when President Putin was clearly told, not just by President Biden, but by President Macron of France and others, these will be the consequences if you invade Ukraine. These will be the sanctions that you will face. We will stand by Ukraine. And he decided to ignore all that. And since, Eric, we can compare who was President Putin before and after this catastrophic decision to invade. Before, he was this master strategist who was working with China to present some type of global alternative to the U.S.-dominated West. What is he now? He's barely clinging to power within Moscow itself. His regime has been exposed to anyone who has access to reliable news sites like yours as a hollow criminal mafia, essentially, regime, totally corrupt, incompetent in the battlefield, and now even facing domestic opposition from rivals that President Putin himself created. So that's where we stand. And yes, tremendous cost, borne mostly by whom? By the Ukrainians themselves, who have decided as a nation that they are going to defend their territory, their sovereignty, their freedom. And that's their decision. It's been backed uniformly by the United States with its European Union and NATO partners and allies, And this will all be ratified this week as President Biden leads all these allies at the NATO summit in neighboring Lithuania. Please.
Edward, looking back at the war in Ukraine and the impact that it has had to the world, are there any lessons learned yet?
Well, one of the lessons that President Putin is learning is that when you invade, you better take seriously the cautions and warnings of the United States and its European Union and NATO allies and partners. So that's one of the major lessons here. The other is, of course, that in unity there is strength. And that's what we've seen here. This is what is so extraordinary. We have to put this in a context, Eric. Remember the predictions before this invasion. Your question is a good one. What, 500 days of war? So a good time to look back. Remember the predictions. The predictions were Ukraine would collapse immediately. President Zelensky would flee. Russia would march in. There would be no contest. We've seen the opposite. President Zelensky has emerged as this inspiring leader, not just for Ukrainians, but around the globe, showing how the valor of his own people, determined to stay, determined to defend their country, something that citizens around the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, can all understand that impulse to defend your nation. And that's what Ukraine is doing with the support of the United States and the European Union and NATO. And we've seen, for example, China embarrassed here with President Xi Jinping going to Moscow on a 3-day trip here to support his, as he called him, his close friend, his intimate friend, Vladimir Putin, now and describing on the verge of this and the eve of this catastrophic invasion, a no-limits partnership between China and Russia. Now there are questions within China itself about President Xi Jinping's judgment here to put this kind of a bet on a completely unreliable character like Vladimir Putin, who now we've seen with this mutiny, Eric, the fallout continues. The embarrassment to President Putin continues, and it's simply up to around the globe, again, watching, listening to reliable news sources like yours, the facts here, and to decide and to understand that there's one way to stop this terrible cost. Right. One very simple way. Unity in isolation of Russia. Please.
Edward, finally, let's talk about the current and what is happening currently around the world. And it involves Ukraine and it involves the United States of America. The United States is sending cluster munitions, and the narrative has now changed to Ukraine joining the NATO. If at all the accession is accepted, what difference will it make on the war?
Well, it would have a dramatic difference, and we have to see what the NATO allies will decide. This is the crucial question facing them this week as the NATO allies meet very close, deliberately close, in neighboring Lithuania here. Now, and let's put this in context. At that summit, NATO will welcome in a new member, and that is Finland, which has a long border and a long history with Russia, not just a border, but a history, and for decades had no interest in joining NATO. Like Sweden, its neighbor, Finland was proud to be a neutral country, proud of its independence and neutrality, and has now decided to join the NATO alliance. So that's where we stand now. It depends what the NATO allies decide to do. If they decide to allow Ukraine to join NATO, that will have a dramatic difference. It will change the complexion of the conflict immediately. Please.
Edward P. Joseph, thank you very much for giving us time today and for talking to WION World is One.
You're welcome.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.